Have you ever watched a favorite YouTuber or streamer and seen just a little bit of a glimpse at their desktop and noticed, hey, my desktop looks kind of like that. It's Windows, you know? No, that might just be me. But time and time again, I've noticed that content creators almost always use Windows and never something like Linux. Now, over the past 6 months to a year, the talk about Linux has been increasing drastically. Now, most of this conversation around Linux probably would have picked up around the time that CrowdStrike happened, and pretty much all Windows, well, not all Windows, but a lot of Windows computers globally went down. And of course, a more ongoing and more recent thing is the recall feature and the invasion of privacy and data collection and all these points that have been brought up about Windows not being as great as people tend to give its praises. But in terms of YouTube and Twitch, outside of people who make videos exclusively about Linux operating systems or trying out Linux or even some programming here and there, you almost never see anybody actually using it. Now, most people would hear the word Linux and immediately picture something like Mr. Robot or Jason Bourne hovering outside of the firewall, but I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely not the case. These days, Linux users are, more often than not, the types of people that actually really care about their experience in terms of the operating system, creating communities that are almost exclusively about aesthetics, productivity, and just in general making their systems look awesome. So with all of this said, why do you only ever see Windows on YouTube? Surely it can't just be because people aren't aware of this, right? Right? For a majority of people, when it comes to picking an operating system, there's only two choices that really jump out to you. You either go Windows or you go Mac. The way you decide between the two? Easy. Do you want an Apple desktop or laptop? Or do you want literally anything else? Once you've made your choice, hey presto, whatever you buy will already have the appropriate operating system installed. And if you're building your own PC, don't act like you were ever going to consider running macOS on your beautiful new machine. You're always just going to install Windows. However, in recent times, both of these operating systems are steadily becoming less and less viable. With Windows, as we discussed earlier, hoovering up all of your data and personal information like Henry on a Saturday night at the club while shoving AI in your face the whole time, and Apple products just being outright overpriced as they always have been, underpowered, and just in general money sinks all for one ecosystem.
And the Pro stand, $9.99.
But for those that are actually concerned with these issues, there is an alternative. Linux. Now, the Linux user base is quite small, admittedly, only possessing around a 2.09% market share on desktops, but that still means that 1 in 50 desktops do actually run Linux. Admittedly, some of these are going to be older workstations and older laptops that simply can't run anything else. However, you should still know 1 or 2 people that actually use Linux, or at least have it installed alongside Windows, maybe in a dual boot system. But 1 in 50 is quite a bit. If we apply this percentage to YouTube as well, then 1 in 50 YouTube videos that you watch should feature some kind of Linux desktop, but they don't. Now, this might just be my personal experience, but I do have to admit that I haven't seen a single non-tech or non-programming content creator who doesn't make videos focused on Linux, using it as their go-to operating system. My immediate first thought was that there must be a damn good reason for this, but I just didn't know why. So, for the sake of trying to figure out why this OS is basically unsighted outside of its niche, I decided that the best way to find out was to give it a go myself and see if it's possible to make a gaming video like the other videos on my channel, with as few compromises as possible. That's a very important part there. And so, I got to testing a bunch of different Linux distributions. And after a lot of tweaking, a lot of fiddling around, a couple of installs, and just in general coming up with my own opinions on them, I settled on one of the most iconic and legendary distributions known to man, Arch Linux. A distribution with a reputation for driving its users mad. A distro where you know every single part of the operating system. A distro with an installation process so intense and grueling that, oh hey, it ended up being like 4 commands. Huh, well that was not so difficult. As you can see, the installation process was actually quite easy. And it's even easier if you are fully switching over to Linux and you don't need to worry about keeping your Windows partitions intact. And it's actually a lot more simple than you would expect, especially if you follow a guide online. Realistically speaking, the most difficult part about any Linux system is just finding out what you need, and any other problem that you run into will usually be answered with a simple Google search and a couple of commands that you enter into a terminal. Now this sounds very easy to me, but I'll admit I have a little bit of programming knowledge, so it's not too intimidating. But if it still sounds frightening, even with all of that simplification that I've told you about copying and pasting commands, there are even distributions and desktop environments that are set up to make this process even easier than using the terminal, with inbuilt app stores and pre-installed graphics drivers for your NVIDIA space heater.
What the?
If you're interested in this, take a look at Linux Mint or Pop! OS, and if you're alright with doing a little bit of fiddling, Fedora is a great place to figure out if Linux is for you. Anyway, back to my Arch install. I've personally spent a couple of days tinkering, stealing custom configurations from the internet, making a few of my own adjustments and tweaks to them, and ended up with this as my setup. I personally like to use Hyperland, a tiling window manager, as my go-to desktop environment for maximum efficiency, and KDE Plasma as a fallback for when something doesn't need Hyperland, which basically hasn't happened yet, or I just want to use something a little bit closer to Windows. Installing applications for either of these desktop environments is as easy as a single line in the terminal, and if you set up Flatpaks in KDE Plasma, it's even just inside of the App Store. But now with Steam and OBS installed, and this one really stupid line in a shortcut for Steam changed, seriously, I don't know why it does this, but regardless, Linux is ready for the first stage in content creation, recording. Well, almost. First things first, we need to actually get ourselves a game to play before we can record it. Historically, gaming and Linux were like water and oil. You just simply could not get the two to mix. That was until the Lord himself descended down upon us, bearing in his arms a portable handheld game console, and in his mind a grand scheme. This was none other than Gabe Newell. "Let me try and help out," he said, and with a wave of his hand, he turned water into wine. The software, not the alcohol, which, honestly, pretty sure wine and oil still don't really mix, so this analogy is actually pretty rubbish. "Oh, I'm not done yet," said Gabe. And with a wave of his other hand, he turns the oil into steam, baby. And so the resulting child that came out of this mix of wine and steam is Proton. Now, both wine and Proton are what is referred to as a compatibility layer, which is essentially dark magic to me, but the best way to describe it is that it's like Google Translate for executables, capable of taking Windows applications and games and running them on Linux. Much like Google Translate though, even though most of the time the translation is pretty solid and lets you get a good grasp of what's going on, occasionally the meaning can be completely lost and misunderstood. Going back to Proton though, it's probably best for you to think of it as a special version of wine that's more optimized for running games instead of software, and Valve and Steam have done a pretty damn good job on it. Now, while Proton isn't absolutely flawless, it's actually remarkable how far it's come, with roughly 80% of Steam games being able to run almost out of the box, and an extra 10% that might need some small tweaks to get right, meaning that realistically, only around 10% of games have major issues or just don't work. Even using my own personal library, only around 4% of the games that I own have some major issues, and 2% don't work outright. Now, you will need to keep in mind that some of these games that outright just simply will not run actually can run using Proton, but utilize some form of anti-cheat that simply prevents the game from running on a non-Windows system, like Rust's Easy Anti-Cheat, or the dreaded one. Get it away! Alas, these anti-cheat woes just simply cannot be helped for Linux. At least, not for the moment. You see, after that whole CloudStrike whoopsie-daisy moment not too long ago, there have been talks and rumors about changing some of the kernel policies or something like that for Windows devices, and honestly, I watched a 3-minute video on the topic at like 4 AM before going to sleep, so I don't really know the details. Do not quote me directly, but from what I understand, it is possible that these changes Microsoft are debating could potentially lead to games utilizing kernel-level anti-cheat being able to be played on Linux devices as well, which would just be absolutely fantastic. But let's not forget that we have one single device to thank for all of this, Lord KDEN's prodigy console, the Steam Deck. Just in case you weren't aware, the Steam Deck actually makes use of Linux via SteamOS, meaning that Valve wanting to develop the Steam Deck is pretty much the only reason why Linux gaming is anywhere near the level that it is today. So, while I admit I may never end up buying one, I truly feel like I need to thank this glorious device. At first, the recording seemed suspiciously good. Assuming that you have your correct graphics drivers installed, hardware encoding in OBS works flawlessly. Same thing for software encoding. After a little bit of messing around with settings, getting them to match my recording profile that I normally use on Windows, I had essentially set everything up that needed to be set up, including multiple audio tracks. All that was left was to add the in-game capture to my scene, and I'm pretty much ready to... Where's the game capture? As you might be able to observe, we've already hit our first compromise. OBS on Linux natively does not support game capture. What this means is that some of the features that are available in the game capture on Windows just simply cannot be done on Linux. The most problematic one for me was that there was no way to hide overlays. On Windows, if you use game capture, there's an option that is capable of hiding the Steam overlay and all of its pop-ups in a recording or on a stream, which, as you may be able to imagine, is super useful and normally lets me see my FPS at the top left corner of my screen without impacting any of my footage. Unfortunately, now I would have to pretty much disable the Steam overlay, meaning I can't see my FPS at all. If I didn't, people coming online or sending me Steam messages would show up in videos, which is obviously something that I don't want. The closest that you can get to game capture running on Linux is using VK Capture, a plugin for OBS that requires you to change the launch arguments of the game that you're playing, but is supposed to be able to hide the Steam overlay. But as of writing the script, I haven't tried this out yet. So, future Cow, would you like to tell the audience how it went? Go on, don't be afraid. Why the fuck did I write that? Okay. So I have actually used VK Capture as of recording this, and it seems to work pretty well, honestly. I've only used it on a couple of different small games here and there, but just in general, it's doing the job right. I believe that the way it works is that it kind of like intercepts the frames between the Vulkan layers. I don't know what the hell that means. I'm just kind of spouting nonsense, but it does more or less work. I think that there's a couple of circumstances in which it doesn't work the way that you expect it to, but I haven't run into them yet from my very limited testing, and just in general, it seems to be working pretty well. So, yeah. Okay, let's get back to the script then. Other than that, there also seems to be this strange and small issue where occasionally OBS will just drop a frame or two due to rendering lag while my PC is doing literally nothing, but I haven't been able to find a proper solution nor a real solution to this. Interjection here from Recording Cow again. We're jumping back to the current timeline. I know it's weird. I have figured this out. Turns out that it was just from moving screens around, okay? Just moving windows around inside of Hyperland did this sometimes, and it wasn't much. It was maybe like one frame when you're moving a window, and if you're recording game footage, it doesn't really impact you at all. Anyway, let's get back to the script again. I know it's another interjection, so just keep that in mind. And funnily enough, any gameplay footage that you've seen so far that I haven't specified otherwise has actually been recorded on Linux this whole time. So if you don't believe that it's possible to record gameplay on Linux, think again. And if I can do it, then so can any one of your favorite YouTubers. Now that we have our footage, we can actually move on to the next step in making a video, and that is, of course, the editing. Now, editing on Linux is honestly the most problematic part of making a video on Linux, simply because there aren't many choices, and none of the choices that you actually have are as good as Windows choices. No matter what you do, especially if you try to keep it free, you are going to run into a couple of missing features, or you might have to switch software over to something that you're not quite used to. In terms of free options, the best video editor usually comes down to one of these two. You can either go the true Linux route and use KDEN Live, the most popular open source video editor, or you can go down the proprietary route and end up using Davinci Resolve for Linux. And in order to figure out which is better, I edited the same few clips on both video editors. Now, I'm not going to lie, as I'm writing the script, I'm starting to get a little bit lazy and tired, and I think it would be really funny if I make future me go through and make a montage of all of my live thoughts and provide voiceovers and blah blah. And here we go. The pinnacle of open source editing. Now, this editor is available for Windows as well, but we'll go ahead and just start doing something. Now, I got a couple of clips in Team Fortress 2 that I really thought were quite funny, so I think that what I'm going to try is we're just going to try and put them together. HD 1080p, 25 FPS, 2930, yep. So we can just go for 60 FPS there for a 1080p video. Okay, so I'm seeing at the bottom here not enough audio tracks for all streams, so hopefully if we drag this clip in, it'll automatically update that. Doesn't look like it's doing it though. Can I insert another audio track? Oh, here we go. So right-clicking over here gets you different settings than right-clicking over here. Okay. Whoa. That's a lot of shortcuts to mess around with. Okay. Wow. You can cut clip. Shift-R, Control-Shift-R to cut all clips. Okay. What about a delete? Ripple delete, maybe. Delete subtitle, delete track, delete selected item, guide, clip, markers. Okay. Ripple is the ripple tool. Not quite what I'm after. What else could it be called? Remove. Remove space, space in tracks. All spaces after cursor, remove all clips after cursor. So it doesn't seem like there is a proper ripple delete in then. That's very, very painful. If we flip over to how I'll probably be editing on Davinci Resolve in this, I will be using ripple delete all the time. Basically, the idea is that, but if we have a clip like this, what I'm essentially going to have to do is I'm going to have to cut it, then select the clip that I want, and then I'm going to have to delete it. Forgive how bad this is going to look, by the way. And then there might be another clip behind it, right? And what I'm going to have to do is cut, delete, and then select it, and then we have to manually move it back in. And I'll showcase that to you actually right now. I'm using this, but essentially I'm going to have to come in here. I'm going to have to use Shift and R, just as an example, to make a cut. Go forward, make a cut. Now, what I normally would do is I'd have the cut at the start of the clip, or at the end of the previous clip, and I just go somewhere, and I press Shift-Q, right? And that would basically combine the following actions all into one. It'll cut, select the previous clip, delete, and then move it all over. Now, that's a lot of extra things that you have to do if it's not done for you automatically using ripple delete. And when you are making a video like one of the Lethal Company ones that I make all the time, there's a lot of ripple deletes going on there. Like, there'd probably be about 3, 4, maybe 5 times more key presses if I had to do that every single time, for every single clip, for every single video. So the fact that there's no ripple delete in KDEN Live makes it very difficult to justify using for a large project, especially if you're doing regular projects as well. So this is something that happens occasionally in some of the videos that I make, but I'll occasionally clear my throat. I do that every now and then. And sometimes it's in the middle of a clip that I don't really like, and it kind of sounds like it's getting in the way. Here's a good example of that. How do we get rid of just that here? This is why I have my voice isolated to a different audio track, so that way I can cut out stuff like this. How do I do it in, what's it called, KDEN Live? Okay, so it looks like we're going to need to get an effect on here. This is kind of not great, in my opinion. I don't really like this. Insert an effect. Volume keyframeable. Okay, it appears here you can't edit anything through the actual timeline itself, it seems. And we can adjust the gain here. This doesn't reflect well, in my opinion, on the actual clip. I don't like this. Like, that kind of is just confusing, having that as like an overlay. But I mean, hey, some people might like it, some people might not. Now, how do I zoom here? Because in Davinci Resolve and Premiere Pro and After Effects, there's just basic transform properties that you can edit. I get the feeling that I'm going to need to go into effects and I'm going to need to find transform. Looks like that there is one. That's good. And then we can go ahead and edit these properties here. Okay, there's a graphical way to do it. That's good. That's really good for positioning, getting things in the center, rather than editing those X, Y, and Z things manually. We want to go ahead, zoom right in, and move this. It's a little bit laggy. Again, though, I didn't transcode the clip at all. So you know, beggars can't be choosers. Not liking the fact that there's no snapping into the corner, though. Playback over, it's a little bit rough as well. It's like it's re-rendering the whole thing as a clip, so performance-wise, it's not great. Move it over a little bit more. Just barely. Like that. And we'll see exactly how this one feels. Okay, so it's pretty linear. Ooh, it's chugging. That's lagging quite heavily. Okay, interesting. And that's just from a basic move as well. But yeah, we'll call that. We'll call that for the edit. Pretty basic. Minute 15. Let's put it on main. See how it goes. It looks really good though. That's still very big for a minute and 15 seconds. 390 megabytes. Or megabytes? I don't know, whatever it is. Point is, we can absolutely get that down without compromising on quality. So let's try that real quick. If you want me to be completely honest, this is fantastic for making clips, right, that you can send through like Discord and stuff. Like, let's just say that you have like a long clip that you've clipped using, in my case, OBS or something else, right? Like NVIDIA Shadowplay, whatever the modern version of that is. If you had something that you was clipped using that you wanted to just shorten to send to someone through Discord, or you just wanted something quick that you can upload, this does get the job done pretty quickly. Would I recommend using it for anything longer than, I don't know, one clip, maybe two, stitching two clips together? No. There's no way in hell that I'd be able to edit a Lethal Company video like this. I have much more complexity going on, and just the drawbacks in the speed and the fact that there's no effects built into the clips, there's no transform properties, there's none of that. Everything has to be done by dragging an effect on, or at least that's the initial impression that I got from this. I don't really see this being a usable alternative. You could try, and technically you could do a lot of the stuff that other video editors do in this, but realistically speaking, I don't think you can expect someone to be able to do that kind of stuff in this, to be able to edit that volume of video, to be able to edit all of the stuff that you would in Davinci Resolve in here. And we're going to go ahead and just download the free version. We're not going to do Studio or anything like that because, you know, 500 Australian dollars. We get a zip file here. A little bit interesting. If we want to do this through the terminal, I'm sure that we can just go ahead and open it up, run an ls to see what's inside, and we can just do an unzip Davinci Resolve. And as you can see, it's going to go ahead and unzip it through the terminal. We can always do this by right-clicking and opening with Arc to do this visually. You know, open with Arc and we get a nice little interface for extracting, adding files, blah, blah, blah. Stuff like that. But I like using the terminal. In Davinci Resolve for Linux comes with a nice little PDF and a run file, which is essentially the Linux version of an installer. So we've already got the NVIDIA driver installed. I don't really think this is going to have a good method to install for Arch. Really, all you need to know is this step here. In particular, chmod. Essentially what that does is, you know, I'll take you through line by line. We'll zoom in. CD into the downloads folder, that just puts you in there. Unzip goes ahead and opens up the folder. We've already done that. Extracts everything from the inside. chmod plus X makes the .run file an executable, so that way it runs the code. And then sudo Davinci Resolve Linux run -I basically means install the program. So it looks like we're going to need Fuse for this. So we'll do sudo pacman-s for the install Fuse. And just run with yes, and then we'll run the previous command that we had before, just with -I. This will install Davinci Resolve onto your computer. Yes, we do want to install Davinci Resolve. Do you agree with the terms and conditions? You can read this if you want. I just agree. It's got to set some stuff up, but it doesn't seem to be opening right now. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Installer.dat. So it doesn't seem to really want to open. Symbol lookup error. We're going to have to go ahead and debug this then. Sudo make disabled -libraries. Sudo mv lib glib start into disabled libraries lib g io and then lib g module and /resolve. Okay, that actually worked. That actually did work. So here's what we're going to do. Unsupported GPU processing mode. Please review the GPU drivers and GPU configuration under preferences. Okay. We're going to go ahead and run it through the shortcut now because it passed it with an argument of %u. So if we go ahead and we click update configuration, memory and GPU, doesn't seem to be able to pick up on our GPU currently. Davinci Resolve Arch not detecting GPU. There's no way that's just going to be that simple. Oh my god. It was that simple. It was that simple. This should pick up on our GPU. And good, it does. Now we can actually open up a project. Okay, so this looks a lot more familiar. This is running Davinci Resolve 19, the free version. So we'll go ahead and start using some of those clips that we got and stumbled upon before. We can go ahead and refind our clips back into OBS. And we'll go ahead and we'll use the exact same set of clips here. We'll drag them all in. And I already know more or less how to use Davinci Resolve. Alright, now let's go ahead and start dragging some stuff in. Go into edit page. And we've already hit a couple of problems. As you can see, timeline black in the top right. And audio, well, there just isn't any. So what's going on here? I can tell you what's going on because I've done a little bit of research on this. But Davinci Resolve on Linux has significantly more limitations with what it can work with than Davinci Resolve on Windows. So this is where we're going to get a little bit into the in-depth, the nitty-gritty of stuff. But on Windows 10, it supports all of these different formats almost completely with decode and encode options, right? And as you can see here, H.264, H.265, and AV1. These are the main video codecs that you see people record in for gaming videos and stuff, right? Which is, again, what I've shown before, a lot of what I record in. And these are going to be your MOVs, MKVs, and MP4s. But that's the basic idea here for Windows 10. And these are the three that we're looking at, the three big ones that we're going to be wanting to think about and utilize for our ideas here, considering that we are working with clips recorded from OBS on Windows, right? And this is what NVIDIA Shadowplay would also output as well. They'd be doing H.264 MP4s, okay? And if we scroll down, because this is all in Windows, right? Keep in mind, this is all in Windows. If we scroll down into the video section for Linux, there's a couple of things that are not really missing, especially from some of these formats here. A lot of these are still available. But if we go down into video for H.264 and H.265 and AV1, you can see here that the decode is only available on Studio for a lot of these things. And then AV1 is the only one that's actually properly available. So we'll need to find some other form to something else to turn our video into that's not H.264 or H.265. Right? If you have Studio, then you can go ahead and use them. I'm going to open up another instance of OBS, just so that way I can configure some settings around. All right, if I go into recordings, we can see that we do have some alternative choices for video encoding, but there's some problems, right? Firstly, AV1 should be fine. As we saw before, AV1, I believe, is supported, but only with GPU encoding and decoding, which means that you need a 40 series, I believe. You might be able to decode on a 30 series, I'm not certain. We could test it out in a little bit. But as we can see, there's some issues. H.264 using FFmpeg. HEVC using FFmpeg, which is H.265. Okay. And then NVIDIA NVENC AV1, which I can't use because I don't have a 40 series. H.264, which doesn't work. And H.265, which also doesn't work. And there's another AV1 option. Now, I might have to use one of these AV1 options to try and get it to work properly. And that's not even running into the audio problem that we're facing as well. Because if I scroll and find the audio section for Linux, these are what it supports, okay? It supports WAV, AIFF, and some form of MPEG audio. But here's the thing, you can see here, audio encoder, FFmpeg AAC, which means that you need to record your audio using something else, right? Like a WAV. And I'm pretty sure that you can also record using maybe Opus. Now, if we scroll down here, yeah, we can see FLAC, we can see IMF, and we can see Opus here, MOV MP4. So we will almost certainly want to be recording our audio using Opus. AOM AV1 with FFmpeg Opus. This means the recording that I'm going to be doing, if it even works, is going to be entirely done on the CPU, if it works, right? So we're recording right now, which is a solid start, and as you can see, CPU usage shoots up to 10%. All right, now I have a very strong CPU, all right? So doing this on Linux isn't really that big of a drawback. And if I go ahead and I show the desktop, you can see the total CPU usage has gone up to 20% as well, okay? So honestly, this is not that bad, this one, I believe. And we go ahead and we drag this recording in. I'll move it over here, drag it in, and what we'll be able to see is that it does actually have the video, which is great. Fantastic. But we're running into another problem. Where's the audio? We're not getting any of our audio tracks now. And if we go ahead and we go into media to view some of the more advanced properties, AV1, no audio. So we play the microphone track, start, and as you can see, CPU, and we can hear our audio. So they definitely exist. The audio's there. It exists. Why are we not able to play it back, though? And that is because if we go up to video and we go into MKV, the decode for H.264, H.265, and VP9 works, and I'm pretty certain that it also works perfectly fine for AV1, as we've seen. I don't think that we can even have multi-track audio working, or any audio working from this, actually. Here we go. Embedded audio in video containers. For the audio. All decodable audio formats listed above with a valid header metadata. MOV, MXF, R3D, MP4, AVI, etc. But what's interesting is that we are recording using Opus. As I'm sure I've made it very clear, KDEN Live lacks a few features and can feel sluggish to use whenever doing something even slightly more complex than a few cuts here and there. Meanwhile, the free version of Davinci Resolve is really held back by its audio codec issues, forcing you to either use awkward workarounds or unnecessarily inflate file sizes beyond what I believe to be reasonable, especially for my use case. These problems, though, pretty much are solved in Davinci Resolve Studio, though, which, unfortunately, costs a whopping 500 Australian dollary dues. It's a lot for me, but larger content creators would likely be able to justify a large purchase for editing, or already own Davinci Resolve Studio in the first place. Just because this solution is a bit too expensive for me, doesn't mean that it's unreasonable or even a bad idea for a professional content creator. Anyway, at this process, there is only one more thing left to do, and that is making the thumbnail. As you may have gathered from the video editing section, the Adobe suite is not available on Linux and doesn't function reliably when used under a compatibility layer like Wine. Now, while we're keeping it free, Linux does have two great options available to it. The GNU image manipulation program, otherwise known as GIMP, is a staple when it comes to image editing on Linux, and sometimes even on Windows as well. GIMP provides a quick, easy, relatively fleshed out experience while also being a free open source alternative, but once again, there are some features that are lacking or outright missing when comparing to industry standards such as Photoshop. One such difference would be the lack of smart objects, making it incredibly difficult to achieve a non-destructive workflow. The other choice is actually quite interesting, attempting to mimic the Photoshop experience, but from a browser instead. Photopea does just this, to a surprisingly well done degree as well, having a generally pretty smooth experience, only really showing issues under a very large load. Anyway, once again, as of writing the script, I'm feeling really tired, and I haven't really done this stage of the process yet anyway, so go on, chop chop future me, you did so well last time. Oh my god, man, I hate this guy. Photopea is actually really good, meaning that there is absolutely no problems with image editing at all even if you can't use GIMP for one specific image that you're editing. Out of all of these steps, this one is by far the easiest to clear in terms of content creation on Linux. The only thing left is uploading the video, and that's really exactly the same as on Windows, so zero issues there either, meaning we're actually done. After testing out all of the steps that I've previously mentioned in isolation, from what I've seen, it is absolutely possible to make the switch as a content creator, as long as you have a rough idea of what you're doing. And I know that I did test all of these features in complete isolation from one another, but just to prove a point, this entire video, edited from start to finish, I know the whole goddamn 40 or so minutes or however long it's going to turn out to be, was done on Linux. Everything from recording the audio in Audacity, to editing in Davinci Resolve, to the thumbnail that was actually made in Photopea, all of it was done on Linux. But we still haven't answered our main question. The big thing that we all came here for: why aren't content creators using Linux? And to answer that, there's only two things that I can possibly think of. The first of which is just simply exposure. At the end of the day, content creators, while they may be decent at tech, are still just regular people outside of video editing, image editing, and recording. They're basically just regular users. And as I said before at the start of the video, and what you may have thought about Linux when you came into this video, the average user thinks of Linux like it's voodoo magic or something, but this is just one big misconception. Even in just the media that people often consume, when you hear Linux user, you think of something like this. But nothing like the GUI options that come with GNOME or KDE. So please, if you don't like terminals, that does not necessarily mean that Linux can't be for you. Although I will admit the terminal makes things speedy once you get used to it, but you can avoid using it, especially if you pick a good distro. As for the other reason, this one is much more valid than the last one, and it's all about time. Linux as an operating system takes a lot of time to get into. You will need to research what distro you want to use. You'll want to set up a good desktop environment. You'll want to tweak it, change your settings, set up your graphics driver, your partitions, relearn commands in the command line, install all of your software again, and at the end of a week-long process of falling down the rabbit hole and crafting your perfect system, you'll finally have your machine ready to use. This is just the setup process. Things might break further down the line, and fixing those could take a lot longer, especially if you're not used to the operating system. Even if you make minimal changes to something like Pop! OS and you try and use it fresh out of the box, you'll still need to relearn your system, set up all of your editing software, port things over, configure OBS, and maybe even dive into some technical stuff after all of that to make sure things work properly. Linux can take a lot of time to set up right, and content creators often work on extremely tight deadlines. Like, I upload once a week, and I'm struggling even with that. Now, try and imagine somebody who's doing daily uploads managing a full operating system switch. At the end of it all, it probably comes down to it being just a bit of a culture thing, combined with time to set things up. There really isn't a practical reason so far why people can't just use a Linux distribution out of the box to make videos. It's possible, it's very doable, it's just that people don't. Whether it's because they don't have the time to sink into a big project like switching distros or switching to Linux or, doing the whole Gen 2 thing and building from scratch. Let's not even get into that. That's just a pain in the bum. But the choice between Linux and Windows is something that people can make now. But again, Linux can get relatively technical sometimes, so it might not be for everybody. And if you need to use Windows or Mac OS for something along those lines, you just want something simple that works, go ahead. Use them. I really don't care. I am a cow. So, just take advice from whatever you want. Just do whatever you want. But just know that Linux as an operating system, these days, highly usable. In fact, I've got a further point to prove about Linux being usable for content creators. Sure, I've gone through recording, and I've gone through editing, I've gone through thumbnails, I've gone through everything that a YouTuber might do. Everything that a content creator might do in terms of creating a video. But what about live streaming? And I'll admit right here, right now, haven't done it on Linux yet. Keyword, yet. I'm not entirely too sure when I'm going to get the chance to do this, but the times will be on the screen right now. I will be streaming a wide variety. And when I say wide variety, I mean a wide variety of games over a weekend. Haven't picked them out as I'm recording this, but you'll see them on screen, or maybe even Editor will say them right here. Just shut the fuck up. Thank you very much, Editor. But I will be streaming at those times on Linux, giving 30 minutes to each game. I'll go through the exact reasons why I picked some of those games on stream, and I'll probably even make a video about it later in the future. So, like and notification bell, I guess, man, if you... So, unfortunately, the answer to the question is kind of just because they don't know about it, and also because nobody's bothered, which is a very, very uninteresting conclusion to the video. Wow. Yeah, that kind of sucks. Not because Linux isn't usable, it's very usable. In fact, that's a thing that we should all be cheering about. Yippee, yay! But it's just, I had hoped for there to actually be a downfall to make an interesting video out of it. But essentially what I've done is I've made a video that's probably at this rate going to be over half an hour long, that's just going through editing videos, but just on a different operating system. So, yeah, I think I may or may not have wasted your time a little bit. Thanks for watching, I guess? I don't know, I really suck at these outros, man.